Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our salvation. Amen. It is Parents' Day, and at some point when you walk out or when you came in, you would have received or you will receive these flowers. So when I have this on, I feel I have earned it. So if you have earned it, get one. If you are going to earn it, also get one. So it's not just for us who have been through the joys and the sufferings of parenthood, also for the others, I think. Happy Parents' Day today to you. In my hand, I've got an old hymn book. Now, looking at this hymn book, it's old. It's tattered. If you look at it, well, it had its days of glory. I think somewhere it laid in water. You can see the marks. But if I page through it, it is even a bit, how can we say, you can see it was used. It is thumped, you can see where the thumped marks were. And, but this book is one of the most precious possessions that I have. I will never sell this book. There's no price on it. I will never give it away. And I hope that one day my children will have this book. It's an old hymn book. And what is so precious about it, this old, dirty, thumbed book, is a book that I got from my father. Now, in this book, this is for me invaluable. It's far more than just an old hymn book. It represents the sum total of my father's and in many cases also my mother's legacy to me. Looking back, 20 years ago, this year, 20 years ago, a very small gathering stood around the grave. It was a very sunny but windy August early afternoon. It was my father's grave. And when the casket lowered, I was thinking about the legacy I had from my father. He wasn't rich, so we didn't inherit money or all of that. But I inherited two things. I inherited his hymn book and his Bible. And it was wonderful to, after his death, to page through his hymn book and his Bible. He was a very ardent reader. So, and I think that's one thing I have inherited from him, I never read a book without a pen. So as I read, I make notes. And my father did this. So his books, whether it was the Bible or the hymn book, all his books were books that were written all over the place, in the margin, on the back, in this, on whatever empty page there was, there were something written. And I could follow something that was in his heart through reading his notes. How precious it was to read through or to page through his old hymn book. To see those dirty thumb places, his favorite hymns, and he had a few that you could see he loved singing those hymns. It was a time before we had the overhead boards and the projectors and that kind of thing. So we were still Christians of the book, the Bible and the hymn book. We took both to church. My parents was in no way model parents. It were in no way parents of the book. I mean, there's no book for parenting as such. But they left us a wonderful legacy. Looking back, it's wonderful to see what they did. They were of the old school. I mean, we were still getting hidings. They believed in the rod. And I remember my mother, she didn't have a rod, she had a slipper. An old slipper, and if I did wrong, and I did wrong many times, I was not a very sweet boy, I think. So when I did something wrong, she would take me in, and then with the slipper, every time it gets down on my bottom, you should not do this again. And so I learned the lessons of life the hard way. But I appreciated them. When we talk about parenthood today, we know it's something that's not easy to talk about. Because it's something that concerns every single one of us, whether we're a parent or not. And that's why I would like to talk to you about perpetual parenthood. Perpetual parenthood means parenthood that's lasting. Parenthood even beyond the grave. We all want to be model parents. Getting it right is a totally different story. Parenthood beyond the grave, parenthood that lasts. And then I had to ask myself the question, when thinking about today, what legacy would I like to leave for my children? I've got two. I love them to bits. They are wonderful. I think every father and every mother who has children, their kids are the best, the brightest, the most handsome, the most beautiful, the prettiest, everything in overdrive. Well, my kids are. I think so. I love them. My son will be 30 years this year. My daughter, 25. That makes me very old. But I was there when both of them were delivered. My son, late afternoon. My daughter, 3 o'clock in the morning. Typical women. 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I was there with both of them. I love them. But one thing that scares me, and when I stood there, it scared me to death to think when I held my daughter, when I held my son in my arms for the first time, is that God has entrusted these kids to me, of all people. And what makes it worse is that when they were born, they didn't come with a textbook. You see, there are many textbooks about childbearing, child raising, but none of them has the name of my child on it, because each one of them is so unique. When I look at them, it's like looking into a mirror. And I'm sometimes looking at them wondering, my goodness, I see so much of myself in them. Well, my kids grew up between the church and the theater. I was very much involved in the theater, and my wife as well. And so they grew up in the church and in the theater, and they love music. So I'm glad about that. They also love cats. We are a family of cats. So recently, I talked to my wife, and I said to her, well, I don't know if we will have grandchildren, but we will have a lot of grand cats. So we called our home jokingly, our catacomb, because there are so many cats. My daughter refers to our home and our family. When people ask about our family, she refers to our family as a very totally happy, dysfunctional family. They all think we're weird. But when I held my kids, I knew God had entrusted those kids to me. And that scared me. I had to think about raising them. How can I raise them? Knowing that I'm not God, knowing that I'm not a model parent, I will never maybe be. And I had to look at the biblical view of a family. When I look at the Bible, and I look at the Old Testament, the family was the core. It was the nucleus of society. Well, if you look at the house of the father, and for many weeks in our morning services we talked about the prodigal son, and especially look at the father and the house and the home of that family, and how that influenced the prodigal son and the older son. But in the Old Testament, it was referred to the house of the father, the bayit or the bed ab. The house of the father, that was where everything happened. It was the life center. It was the nucleus of everything that happens in the community. And whenever anything has happened, like war, they went out on war and into a battle, they come back home. The house, the home was everything. And when the house was, or the home was threatened, they will go out for war and they will fight for it. Well, the Bible is also the book of the covenant. And God's covenant is not only with the individual, but with the family, with the home, with those in it. It's not only a matter of individuals sitting or living there. And that's how we live our family lives these days. Everyone goes out and everyone has his own life. But in the Bible, that was not the case. The family had a bond. And God comes, and with the family, he closes a covenant. That's why we baptize babies. That's why we include our babies or our children when we have communion. We say, come to the table, and we invite them. They're part of our family, also our church family. By no way the church or the Old Testament family was a token of a model family. They were all dysfunctional. Think of Abraham, his quarrel with his nephew Lot. Think of Rebekah and her blue-eyed son Jacob. Think of Hannah and Peninnah. Go to Joseph, his story. So David, look at his house. But even though they had dysfunctional families, they could live out and they could leave for their families a legacy that we can learn from even today. In ancient Israel, large families were deemed necessary and even a blessing from God. So everything was about the family. So God entrusted us with children. Looking at the Old Testament family and now to us. And my question was, so God, why did you entrust me with children? Well, God gives us children to care for a long time. They're in our houses for 18 years. Well, if you look at the animal world, birds and animals mature quickly and move out of their own in a matter of weeks and months. But with us, God entrusted those kids to us for 18 years, 20 years, maybe more. In Africa, we have a saying, it takes a village to raise a kid. God entrusted that kid not only to the parents, but to the community, to the church, to everyone that he comes into contact with. And every person has some kind of influence on that kid. For me as a parent, I knew that what I have in my house, those two kids, they were God's gift to me. And in a certain sense, I was God's gift to them. And that was a huge responsibility on my shoulders and on the shoulders of Renee. I realized that my values will become their values. I also realized that the first view of God will be their view of me, of their parent. And they will project that view of their parent on God. That's how they will see God. What a staggering thought. Raising a child successfully sounds like a superhuman task. And we're not superhumans, we're not God. So I had to think very hard and loud. What is my legacy? What do I want my children to remember, to get from me, other than what I genetically pass on to them? And there are a few things. The first, I hope to leave my kids with hope. If there's one thing that I wish they could say after my death, is that my father he taught us to hope. He imparted hope instead of despair in our lives. We live in a world filled with despair, and parents contribute to that despair in every conceivable way. We talk despair, we show despair, we live despair. But if we can get to the point where we can start living as people of hope, because Christ in you is the hope of glory, then we will change our kids. One thing I've learned from my parents, and I honor them on this day for that, is that they imparted hope into us. It didn't always go well. We had times of pain and suffering, times that were hard times. And in all those times, there was one thing that they imparted, that they kept saying, and that was, there's hope. In every situation, there is a glimmering of hope. There's a ray of hope. There is something to hope for. There is a tomorrow. There were many tears. But each and every time we knew there was hope. The second thing I would like to leave my kids with is for them to know that I have unconditionally loved them. So I hope to leave my kids with unconditional love and not calculated compassion. I thank God for parents who loved me no matter what. In spite of many mistakes and times of hardships, they always ensured us of their unconditional love, no matter what. You see, calculated compassion, that's why I don't call it love. Calculated compassion is nothing more than conditional love. That is an if love. If you live up to my standard, I will love you. If you do this, if you get straight A's for your school, for your subjects, I will love you, and I will love you more if you do even better. And so we impart on our kids that kind of if love, conditional compassion. And our kids grow up and they do the same with their kids, and they do the same with their kids, and they always feel unfulfilled. And they always have to work to earn love. Once you've lost everything and you've learned God's love unconditionally, you have an idea to give unconditional love. I would like my kids to know that I love them, no matter what. The third, I would love to leave my kids with a legacy of my prayers and not my pays. I thank God for a father who prayed for me. When we lowered his casket, that was one thing that I also remember thinking by myself. And that was, well, who's going to pray for me now? My father was not a very outspoken person. He was very quiet. And I remember from childhood, we had family devotions. So my father would gather everyone in the room, and then we would go on out. He would read a passage from the Bible, and that was extremely boring. And then he would start to pray. Now he could pray long prayers. I remember that from very young childhood. And I would also remember he usually started praying for the government. He started with the Prime Minister. And then he prayed right through the cabinet, right through the government. And then he'd pray for every important person and everybody that I don't know. And then he started with the whole family. And we had a very big family. I mean, my mother comes from a family of 12 kids. So praying through all of them and all the nephews and the cousins, it was quite a thing. And then when he started coming to our nucleus family, my brothers, I knew, well, the end is nigh. But I always knew when I grew up, well, that was just our family prayers. I really appreciated that, even though at that point it was really boring. But when I grew up, and I was in the ministry, and I was married, and I had kids, my father, old as he was, every time he saw me, he said, I'm praying for you. And I knew he did. When they lowered his casket, I remember asking the question, so who will pray for me now? My mother was there, and she was also a prayer. She prayed for us. But I also remember something that I heard, and that there is no expiry date on prayers. We buy food with expiry date on, and we think the same is for prayers. And no, there's no expiry date. The prayers that he prayed that time, God is still answering them. To pray for your kids is the greatest investment you can make. It's a bigger investment. It has more results, more returns than any money you can give. I want my kids to know that I pray for them. I want to know my kids that there were times in their lives where they couldn't pray, that I stood in their shoes and I learned to intercede for them, because intercession means that I'm getting right into their shoes, and when they can't pray, I pray as if I'm there. Prayers. It's easy to pay off our kids, to send them to this and send them to that, and let our money do the talking. It's better to pray, to have your kid know, or make him aware of the fact that he has a father, he has a mother who knows God in prayer. and who's there to pray for them. I hope to leave them with the power of healing and not the memories of hurt. This world is filled with hurt and pain. And at times we do inflict pain on our kids. At times we do inflict hurt and pain, that's part of life. And each and every one of you, I'm pretty sure you can testify to that you will experience pain, you will experience hurt in your life. There's no life, no family that I know that has not experienced that. I used to do counseling at a children's home. Once a week, I had an office at a children's home, and I went there, and I saw pain like you've never seen it before. Kids molested and abused. The hurt and the pain I saw there are indescribable. At times, I was so overcome with the pain of my clients, of the kids that sat before me, overwhelmed with anger towards their parents who hurt them and who were mostly self-victims of hurt. As a pastor, I've dealt so many times with fathers assaulting kids and abusing their mothers. I've dealt with homes destroyed by alcohol. I've dealt with kids who had to drag their intoxicated father or mother through the streets, to their house in full view of their peers. The impact thereof cannot be described. The anger unfathomable. But I also, while I've seen that, I've experienced in many of those homes parents and children finding God and finding healing, restored and renewed. Yes, they are hurt. Yes, there are pain. We will have pain. But thank God, I also witness restoration, healing. For my kids, I hope to leave behind my legacy of healing rather than pain. The last, I hope to leave them Jesus. And when I say that, it's not some holier than thou thing about Jesus. It's not a preaching about Jesus. It's not a sermon about Jesus. It's not you should follow Jesus kind of finger wagging. I hope that they can see something authentic of Jesus in me. I hope they can see the glimmering of love, of the love of Jesus through me and my wife. I hope they will be able to remember us for the hope that we shared with them. That's Jesus. I hope that they can remember us for the love of God, because that's Jesus. I hope they can remember us for the healing, because that's Jesus. I hope they can remember us for our prayers, because that's Jesus. I hope to leave them Jesus. I've got this old hymn book. His favorite hymn was on an old rugged cross, stood the emblem of suffering and joy. On a hill far away, there's an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and joy. I remember a father who knelt by that cross and left his sorrows, his sins, down there. My kids, I want to leave you, Jesus. Amen.
Please rise if you're able and sing the Lord's Prayer.